Hi there. Tonight we step into the muddy, torchlit lanes of a medieval village, where you're a young woman who's just done the unthinkable, refused to marry. Picture yourself standing by the well, the air sharp with the scent of damp earth and blooming hawthorn, your rough wool dress patched at the knees. The bucket in your hands feels heavier than usual, not from water, but from the weight of whispers swirling around you. You've said no to the miller's son, a match your family swore would secure their future, and now the village is buzzing like a kicked hive. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this without some serious side-eye and a few choice words from your neighbors. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're at the heart of the village. A cluster of wattle daub cottages huddled along a rutted path, the late spring. Sun barely cutting through the morning mist. The well's creaky pulley squeaks as you haul up water, but it's the villagers' murmurs that grate louder. She turned him down flat. A woman hisses, her basket of turnips forgotten. Another snorts. What's she think she's worth? A queen. You keep your eyes on the bucket, pretending not to hear, but their words sting like nettles. Refusing marriage isn't just a choice. It's a rebellion, and you're already feeling the fallout. In medieval Europe, marriage was the cornerstone of social order, especially by the 13th century, when the church declared it a sacrament, tying families, land, and labor together. For a peasant like you, saying no wasn't just personal, it was a slap to the village's delicate web of alliances. A quirky tidbit: some villagers believed an unwed woman brought bad luck, like a storm cloud, over the crops, so you're dodging glares as if you've cursed their barley. Historians still argue whether this superstition was widespread or just a way to bully women into compliance. But right now, you're the one weathering the storm. You hoist the bucket, water sloshing, and trudge back toward your family's cottage. Your hands are rough from spinning wool, your back sore from hauling firewood, and you're barely 17, yet the village acts like you've committed treason. You share your home with your parents, a younger brother, and a goat that's currently chewing your best straw mat. Privacy's a myth here, and your refusals the talk of every hearth. You overhear a neighbor mutter about stubborn lasses as you pass, and you bite back a retort. The truth is, you didn't refuse the miller's son out of pride. You just couldn't stomach a life tied to his drunken rants, a detail the gossip conveniently skips. Let's be honest, you're exhausted. You've been up since dawn, milking the cow, dodging your mother's lectures about securing your future. The village expects you to be a dutiful daughter, a blushing bride-to-be, but you're neither right now. You smirk, thinking how modern folks would cheer your independence, but here, it's a scandal. Joke number 1, if saying no is a crime, you're the village's most wanted. You push open the cottage door, the smoky air hitting you, and brace for your parents' reaction. They've been haggling with the miller's family for weeks, and your refusal has thrown their plans and that precious strip of land into chaos. Your mother's at the hearth, stirring a pot of thin porridge, her face tight with worry. Your father's outside, probably cursing your name to the chickens. The village's whispers will reach them soon, if they haven't already. And you're not sure what's worse, their disappointment or the villagers' scorn. You set the bucket down, water sloshing onto the dirt floor, and try to ignore the knot in your stomach. Refusing marriage feels like freedom, but it's a heavy kind. and you're already wondering how you'll survive the consequences in this tight-knit, judgmental world. You're inside your family's cottage, the smoky air thick with the scent of porridge bubbling over the hearth, the bucket of well water, remember those stinging village whispers, still dripping by the door. The morning light seeps through, the cracks in the shutters, casting thin stripes across the dirt floor where your goat's nibbling a stray bit of straw. Your refusal to marry the miller's son has set the village buzzing, and now you're facing the fallout at home. Your mother's stirring the pot with a vengeance, her lips pressed tight, while your father stomps in from outside, his face redder than the embers. They're about to unleash a storm of pleas, begging you to reconsider, and you're bracing for it. Your hands still damp from the well, your wool dress itching like a bad omen. In medieval Europe, marriage was a family affair, not just a personal choice. And by the 13th century, parents saw it as a lifeline for securing land, labor, and social standing. Your refusal threatens all three. For peasants like your family, a daughter's marriage could mean a dowry of land or livestock, binding households together for survival. A quirky tidbit, some parents offered betrothal gifts, like a carved comb or a sack of barley, to sweeten a match. Your mother's been waving a wooden spoon at you, hinting it's part of the deal. Historians still argue whether these gifts were bribes or symbols of unity. But as your father glares, you're betting on the former. You stand by the hearth, the fire's heat stinging your legs, and try to look busy, rearranging the kindling. Your mother slams the spoon down, her voice sharp. You'll ruin us, girl. She's not wrong. Your family's strip of land, barely enough for a few crops, was part of the marriage deal with the miller. Without it, you're all staring at lean winters. Your father joins in, his voice booming about duty and the family's name. You think back to the well, those women's whispers about your pride, and realize they're nothing compared to this. Your parents aren't just angry, they're scared, and you're the cause. Joke number 1. If saying no is a sin, you're about to get a sermon from Saint Dad. You clutch the edge of your dress, the wool rough under your fingers, and try to explain. You don't want the miller's son, his temper, his ale-soaked breath, but your words sound weak against their desperation. Your mother's eyes are wet now, her voice softer, pleading. You'll have a home, security. You want to scream the security shouldn't mean a lifetime of dodging his fists, but you bite your tongue. The village's expectations, the church's rules, they're all behind your parents' pleas, pushing you toward a life you can't stomach. You glance at your brother, lurking by the door. His eyes wide. He's too young to understand, but old enough to feel the tension. The cottage feels smaller, the smoky air choking, as your father paces, muttering about the miller's family withdrawing their offer. You know what's at stake. Without this marriage, your family loses land, allies, maybe even respect. You've seen it happen. A neighbor's daughter refused a match, and her family's now scraping by, shunned at the market. You think about the betrothal gift, that wooden spoon your mother's clutching, and wonder if it's meant to tempt you or shame you. Joke number 2. If that spoon's a bribe, you'd rather trade it for a ticket out of here. But there's no escape, not when every eye in the village is watching, waiting for you to cave. Your mother starts again, her voice a mix of fear and fury, listing the horrors of spinsterhood, poverty, loneliness, scorn. You're not naive. You know refusing marriage is like refusing air in this world. But the miller's son, with his leering grin, feels like a worse fate. You think about the wellside gossip, how the village already calls you stubborn, and realize Your parents' pleas are the first wave of a battle you're not sure you can win. Joke number 3. If marriage is a cage, your family's begging you to lock yourself in. For now, you nod, pretending to listen, and slip outside to escape. The cottages wait, knowing their words, then the villagers will follow you like a shadow. You're outside the cottage, the morning air cool and sharp, the villagers, humcarts creaking, chickens clucking swirling around you as you clutch your wool dress, still damp from the well. The weight of your parents, please remember. That wooden spoon and their desperate talk of security lingers like smoke in your chest, but now you're trudging toward the church, summoned by the priest's stern message delivered by a neighbor's boy. Your refusal to marry the miller's son has rippled beyond the village gossips, and the church, with its iron grip on your world, is stepping in. The stone chapel looms ahead, its bell tolling low, and you're bracing for a lecture that'll make your father's rants seem tame. Your heart's pounding, the dirt path rough under your worn shoes, as you steel yourself for the priest's warnings about duty and sin. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church controlled marriage, declaring it a sacrament by the 13th century, and refusal to marry was seen as defiance, not just of family, but of God's plan. For a peasant woman like you, rejecting a match could spark ecclesiastical ire, with priests using sermons or private rebukes to enforce compliance. A quirky tidbit: some priests sprinkled holy salt on defiant women, believing it cleansed rebellious spirits. You're hoping this one skips the seasoning, but his scowl doesn't bode well. Historians still argue whether these rituals were symbolic or meant to shame women into submission, but as you step into the church's damp shadow, shame's definitely on the menu. You push open the heavy wooden door, the air inside thick with incense and mildew, the stone floor cold underfoot. The priest, a wiry man with eyes like flint, stands by the altar, his prayer book clutched like a weapon. He fixes you with a stare that could curdle milk, and you drop your gaze, the wool dress itching worse under his scrutiny. You defy God's will, he begins, his voice low but cutting, and you flinch, already regretting coming. He's not here to chat. He's here to remind you that marriage is your sacred duty, a path to salvation through heirs and obedience. You think back to your parents' cottage, their pleas for you to marry the miller's son, and realize the church is their ally in this fight. The priest paces, his robes swishing, and launches into a sermon about Eve's sin, how women must submit to avoid her fate. You're tempted to roll your eyes. Joke number 1. If Eve's the problem, you'd like a word with Adam, but you keep still, knowing defiance here could mean worse than gossip. He warns that refusing marriage risks your soul, your family's honor, and the village's harmony. The miller's son, with his drunken temper, is apparently God's chosen for you, and saying no is spitting in the face of divine order. You clench your fists, the iron cross above the altar glinting like a judge, and wonder how God could pick such a lousy match. The church's rules are clear. Marriage binds you to a husband, 2 heirs to a life of service. The priest's voice rises, quoting scripture about fruitful wombs, and you feel the weight of every village, aye, even here in this dim chapel. You think about the well-side whispers, how they called you stubborn, and realize the church's warnings carry a sharper edge. A neighbor's daughter once defied a match and was dragged to a church courtyard. Not there yet, but the threats. Real, a quirky detail. Some priests kept sin lists, noting defiant women to watch. Joke number 2. If you're on his list, you're hoping for a typo. You shift the stone floor numbing your feet, and try to look penitent. The priest softens slightly, urging you to pray for wisdom, to accept the miller's son and save your soul. He hands you a candle to light at the Virgin's shrine, a gesture of mercy, but it feels like a leash. You take it, the wax cold in your hands, and mutter a promise to think it over. You think about your parents' fear, the villagers' scorn, and know the church's warnings are just the start. As you step outside, the bell tolling behind you, the village feels smaller, its paths tighter. Joke number 3. If God's plan is marriage, you're hoping for a divine rewrite. For now, you head home, the candles wait, a reminder of the church's reach, knowing its warnings will echo in every step you take. You're trudging back from the church, the priest's warnings. So remember that holy salt and his sermon on Eve, ringing in your ears like a sour bell. The village path is muddy under your worn shoes, the air heavy with the scent of woods and damp straw, and the candle he gave you feels like a lead weight in your hand. The miller's son, with his ale-soaked temper, is still the talk of the village, and your refusal to marry him has drawn the church's ire alongside your parents' pleas. Now, as you near your family's cottage, you're grappling with the reality of life as a spinster, a path that stretches before you like a lonely, thorn-strewn road. Your wool dress itches, your shoulders ache from the well's bucket, and the villagers' humcarts creaking, voices muttering feels sharper, as if every sound judges your choice. In medieval Europe, spinsterhood was a precarious state, especially for peasant women like you, who lacked the wealth or status to carve out independence. By the 14th century, unmarried women faced social isolation and economic hardship, as marriage was the primary path to security and respectability. A quirky tidbit: some villagers called spinsters hearthkeepers, a polite term for women, stuck tending their family's fire, though it came with a sting of pity or already dreading the title. Historians still argue whether spinsterhood offered rare freedom or just a different kind of cage, but as you push open the cottage door, the cage feels all too real. The smoky air hits you, your mother at the hearth stirring porridge, her glance sharp but weary. Your father's outside, chopping wood with more force than necessary, and your brother's nowhere in sight, probably dodging the tension. You set the candle on a wobbly table, its wax already softening in the heat, and try to ignore your mother's sigh. "What did the priest say?" she asks, her voice tight, and you mumble about duty and prayer, avoiding the bit about your soul's peril. The truth is, you're staring down a life without a husband's protection, a home of your own, or the village's goodwill. You think back to the well, those women's whispers about your pride, and realize spinsterhood's already branding you. You sink onto a stool, the wool dress scratching your legs, and picture the years ahead. As a spinster, you'll stay in this cottage, a burden on your parents until they're gone. Then maybe your brother's charity. You'll spin wool, haul water, mend clothes, tasks you know well, but now they'll define you, not lead to a hearth of your own. The village will watch, their pity turning to scorn as your youth fades. You've seen spinsters before, old Maud, living in a crumbling hut, her hands nulled from weaving, her eyes avoiding the market stares. She's your future, and the thought makes you shiver. Joke number 1. If spinsterhood's a crown, it's made of thorns and bad porridge. Your mother hands you a bowl of porridge, thin and grey, and you eat mechanically, the spoon heavy in your hand. The church says marriage is salvation, but spinsterhood feels like exile, a slow drift to the village's edges. You'll have no children, no dowry's legacy, no place in the web of families that keeps this place alive. You think about the priest's candle, its flame unlit, and wonder if prayer could light a different path. But the village's rules are clear. Women marry, bear heirs, keep hearths. Refusing that means you're a stray thread, easily snipped. A neighbor's voice drifts through the open door, gossiping about that stubborn lass. And you wince, the words landing like stones. You stand, brushing crumbs from your dress, and step outside to escape the cottage's weight. The village stretches before you, its thatched roofs glinting in the sun, but it feels hostile now, every glance a judgment. You think about the miller's son, his leering grin, and know you'd rather face this loneliness than his fists. But survival as a spinster means work, cunning, and a thick skin, none of which you're sure you have. Joke number 2, if spinsterhood's a battle, you're armed with a spoon and sheer stubbornness. You glance at Maud's hut in the distance, its sagging roof a warning, and head toward the well, knowing the village's whispers and the spinster's path will dog your every step. You're back at the well, the village's heart, the creaky pulley groaning as you haul up another bucket, the cold water splashing your wool dress. Remember that itchy, patched thing. The priest's warnings about your soul and your parents. Desperate pleas still echo, painting spinsterhood as a lonely road. And now you're facing the village's harsh judgment head-on. The morning sun's higher, burning off the mist, but the air feels heavier with the stares and whispers of neighbors passing by. Your refusal to marry the miller's son has turned you into a spectacle, and the village, with its tight-knit web of gossip, is closing ranks against you. Your hands grip the bucket's rope, rough from spinning wool, and you brace for the scorn that's sharper than the church's sermons. In medieval Europe, social conformity was survival, especially by the 14th century, when villages like yours relied on collective effort, shared fields, shared feasts, shared marriages to thrive. Refusing marriage, a cornerstone of that system, marked you as an outsider, disrupting the alliances that kept families like yours afloat. A quirky tidbit: some villages held shaming walks, where defiant women were paraded with bells or mocked by children to enforce norms. You're praying this one skips that tradition, but the glares feel like a walk of their own. Historians still argue whether shaming was formal or just mob-driven spite. But as you set the bucket down, you're tasting the latter. A group of women approaches, their baskets brimming with leeks and eggs, their chatter halting as they spot you. Still too good for the miller's boy. One sneers, her voice loud enough for others to hear. You force a blank face, but your cheeks burn. Joke number 1, if scorn's a soup, they're serving it by the ladle. You think back to the church, the priest's lecture on duty, and realize the village is his enforcer. Their judgment a whip to drive you back in line. Another woman, older, with a face like dried leather, mutters about cursed spinsters ruining the harvest. And you want to snap that your no didn't blight their barley, but you bite your tongue. You hoist the bucket, water sloshing, and start toward the cottage, their stares prickling your back. The villagers' paths are busy, nowmen hauling carts, children chasing a stray dog, but you feel alone, a ghost in their midst. Refusing marriage isn't just a choice, it's a brand, marking you as selfish, strange, or worse. You've seen it before. Old Maud, the spinster in her crumbling hut, ignored at the market, her name a warning to girls. Don't end up like Maud, your mother used to say, and now you're her heir apparent. You think about the well-side whispers from yesterday, how they called you proud, and realize judgments, not just talk, it's a wall, cutting you off. The cottage looms ahead, its thatched roof sagging, but you pause, the bucket heavy in your hands. The village's scorn isn't just personal, it's practical. Without a husband, you're a burden, not a contributor. No dowry's meadow, no heirs to work the fields. You overhear a man by the alehouse, laughing about wasted wombs. And you grit your teeth, tempted to dump the bucket on him. Joke number 2. If judgment's a trade, this village could open a guild. You think about your parents' fear, the church's warnings, and know the village's rejection is their weapon, pushing you toward the miller's son or oblivion. You step forward, the path muddy underfoot, and catch sight of a neighbor's daughter, her eyes darting away. She's your age, betrothed to a blacksmith, and her pity stings worse than the older women's scorn. The village's judgment is a tide, pulling you under, and survival means swimming against it. You think about Maud again, how she shuffles through the market, head down, and wonder if you'll grow that tough or if you'll break. Joke number 3. If spinsterhood's a club, the membership fee is every stair in this village. For now, you trudge toward the cottage, the bucket's weight a mirror of the village's disdain, knowing their judgment will shadow you like a second skin. You're back at the cottage, the bucket of well water, member those cutting village stairs, set by the door, its contents slushing as you nudge it with your foot. The smoky air inside clings to your wool dress, still damp and itchy, and the village's harsh judgment, sharper than the women's sneers at the well, weighs heavy. Your parents' pleas and the priest's warnings about your soul have painted a grim picture of starhood. And now, as you sit by the hearth, the fire's weak glow barely warming your hands, you're facing a new reality, economic hardship. Refusing to marry the miller's son means no husband's support, no dowry's meadow, and a life scraping by on the village's edges. Your mother's at the loom, her shuttle clacking with a rhythm that feels like a countdown, and you're bracing for the struggle that's already creeping in medieval Europe. Marriage was an economic lifeline for women, especially peasants, like you, who relied on a husband's labor and land to survive. By the 14th century, an unwed woman faced a stark reality without a household of her own. You'd depend on family, charity, or meager work, often barely enough for bread. A quirky tidbit, some spinsters became alewives, brewing weak beer to sell, marked by a broom hung over their door. Maud's got one, though her brew's more sour than her scowl. Historians still argue whether alewiving offered independence or just prolonged poverty. But as you poke the fire, you're seeing the lean years ahead. You shift on the stool, the wool dress scratching your thighs, and glance at your mother, her face lined with worry. She's weaving cloth to trade, but it's not enough to feed for mouths, especially if you're not contributing through marriage. Your father's outside, mending a fence, but his grumbling about useless daughters carries through the walls. Without the miller's land, your family's strip of barley won't stretch far, and you're already a burden, eating their porridge without bringing in dowry or labor. You think back to the well, those women's mutters about cursed spinsters, and realize their scorn masks fear of ending up like you, with nothing but your hands and a fraying dress. You stand, grabbing a distaff to spin wool, the spindle twirling clumsily in your fingers. Spinning's one of the few tasks open to you now, but it pays poorly, barely enough for a loaf or a candle. You've seen spinsters like Maud, their fingers gnarled from years at the wheel, trading skeins for scraps at the market. Without a husband's plough or mill, You're locked out of the village's wealth, its fields and trades. Joke number 1. If poverty's a cloak, you're about to wear it, threadbare. You think about the priest's candle, unlit on the table, and wonder if prayer can fill an empty stomach. The answer's no, and the knot in your gut tightens. The cottage's air is stifling. The fire's smoke stinging your eyes, and you pause. The spindle wobbling. Your brother's back, hauling firewood. His glance avoiding yours, he knows you're the reason for the family strain. Without marriage, you're stuck here, a guest in your own home, until your parents can't support. You or your brother takes over. The village won't help. Their judgment at the well made that clear. You think about alewiving, picturing yourself stirring a vat of mash. But Maud's hunched figure flashes in your mind, her life a warning. Joke number 2. If brewing's freedom, it comes with a side of backache and bad customers. You sit again, the wool half spun, and stare into the fire's embers. Economic hardship isn't just hunger, it's isolation, dependence, a slow erosion of hope. You think about the miller's son, his leering grin, and know you'd rather starve than wake. To that every day. But survival means work spinning, brewing, maybe scrubbing pots for wealthier neighbors. None of it promises more than a corner to sleep in. The village's web of labor, land, and marriage excludes you now, and you're on your own. Joke number 3. If hardship's a song, you're learning the tune without a lute. For now, you pick up the spindle again, the cottage's walls closing in, and brace for a life where every skein of wool is a fight to stay afloat. You're still by the cottage hearth, the fire's embers, barely alive. The half-spun will remember that wobbly spindle, tangled in your lap as you sit on the creaky stool. The smoky air stings your eyes, your wool dress still damp from the well, and the weight of economic hardship, sharper than the village's scorn, presses down. The golden loaf from your mother's baking sits untouched, a reminder of the family's strained stores. Your refusal to marry the miller's son has left you facing spinsterhood's lean prospects, spinning, alewiving, or worsened now. As the village's morning bustle hums outside, you're considering a different path. The convent, the idea of joining a nunnery, whispered by your mother in a rare soft moment, feels like a narrow door to escape the village's judgment and poverty. But you're not sure what lies beyond it. In medieval Europe, convents offered a rare alternative. For women avoiding marriage, especially by the 13th century, when religious life was a socially accepted restricted path for daughters who couldn't or wouldn't wed. For peasants like you, entering a nunnery was tough, requiring a dowry of sorts, often smaller than a marriage one, but still a hurdle for your cash-strapped family. A quirky tidbit. Some convents demanded a veil gift, like a bolt of cloth, or a candle to prove a novice's devotion. You're eyeing the priest's unlit candle on the table, wondering if it'd count. Historians still argue whether convents were sanctuaries or just another cage for women, but as you untangle the wool, the nunnery's promise of shelter calls like a distant bell. You stand, brushing wool fibers from your dress, and step to the cottage's open door, the air fresher but laced with the village's wood smoke. Your mother's at the loom, her shuttles clack a steady beat, and she glances up, her face softening. The convent might take you, she'd said last night, her voice low to avoid your father's ears. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about cursed spinsters, and imagine trading their stares for a cloister's quiet. The village church looms in the distance, its stone walls tied to the nearby convent, a day's walk away. You've heard of its sisters of St. Clair, austere but kind, or so the peddler claimed. But kindness comes with a price, and you're not sure you can pay it. You lean against the doorframe, the wood rough under your palm, and picture the convent. Stone walls, plain habits, endless prayers. It's not freedom, but it's not the miller's son's fists either. You'd escape the villagers' gossip, the economic grind of spinning for scraps. Maybe even your parents' disappointed sighs. But convents aren't for every girl. You'd need to prove your piety, and your family's meager barley won't cover a dowry, even a small one. You think about old Maud, the spinster scraping by, and wonder if the nunnery's walls could shield you from her fate. Joke number 1. If convents are freedom, it's the kind with a curfew and a prayer book. Your father's voice snaps you back, shouting at your brother outside to stack the firewood properly. He hasn't mentioned the convent marriage or nothing in his mind, but your mother's hint gives you a sliver of hope. You think about the priest's warnings, his talk of God's plan, and realize he might push for the nunnery if marriage fails, though he'd frame it as penance, not mercy. The village's judgment, those well-side mutters, would follow you even their nuns aren't immune to gossip. You've heard tales of wayward novices, girls who fled cloisters for love or madness, and wonder if you'd fit their mold. Joke number 2. If nuns are saints, you're hoping for a beginner's guide to holiness. You step back inside, the cottage's smoke curling around you, and pick up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The convent's door is narrow to revows, a life of chastity, but it's a door, unlike the village's closing gates. You think about the miller's son, his leering grin, and know you'd rather face a cloister's rules than his temper. But the nunnery is not a sure thing. Your family's poverty and the church's scrutiny stand in your way. Joke number 3. If the convent's a haven, you're packing light and praying hard. For now, you spin the wool, the shuttles clack. A reminder of the work ahead, and hold the nunnery's promise like a fragile thread, unsure if it'll lead you out or tie you tighter. You're still in the cottage, the spindle twirling in your hands. The half-spun wool remember that tangled mess, piling up as you stand by the smoky hearth. The nunnery's promise, a narrow escape from the miller's son and the villagers. Scorn lingers like the faint thyme sent from your mother's cooking pot. The wool dress itches, your fingers sore from spinning, and the priest's unlit candle on the table glints in the morning light seeping through the shutters. The village's judgment, your parents' pleas, and the looming hardship of spinsterhood have pushed you to consider the convent. But now, as you hear the church bell toll faintly in the distance, you're diving deeper into what that life entails. The nunnery's hidden rules, strict vows, endless prayers, and cloistered walls are coming into focus. And you're wondering if trading one cage for another is worth it. In medieval Europe, convents were governed by rigid rules, especially by the 13th century, when orders like the Poor Clares or Benedictines demanded vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience from women seeking refuge. For a peasant like you, joining meant surrendering personal freedom for a life of prayer, labor, and discipline, often under a strict abbess's watch. A quirky tidbit: some convents required novices to bring a prayer stool, a small bench, carved with saints, to kneel on during hours of worship. You're picturing your wobbly stool at home and doubting it'd pass muster. Historians still argue whether convents offered women agency or just swapped marital control for ecclesiastical chains. But as you spin the wool, the chains feel real. You pause, the spindle wobbling, and glance at your mother. Still at the loom, her shuttles clack a steady rhythm. She's the one who mentioned the convent, a whisper of hope against your father's marriage demands, but she didn't mention the rules. You've heard stories from peddlers' nuns, rising before dawn, chanting Latin psalms, scrubbing floors, and fasting more than feasting. The Sisters of St. Clare, nearby, are known for their austerity, living on alms and coarse bread. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about spinsters, and wonder if a nunnery's silence would be kinder. But silence comes with a price. No family, no laughter, no turning back once you take the veil. You step to the hearth, stirring the fire's embers, the heat stinging your face. The convent's rules aren't just about prayer. They're about erasing your old self. You'd trade your wool dress for a habit, your name for sister, your dreams for devotion. You're not exactly a rebel, but the idea of vowing obedience to God, to an abasmus you bristle. You think about the miller's son, his drunken leers, and know you'd rather kneel for psalms than his temper. But the nunnery's not a free pass. Your family's meager barley won't cover the dowry, and the priest might demand proof of your piety first. Joke number 1. If convents want saints, you're more of a saint in training. The cottage's air is thick, the smoke curling around. You think about the nunnery's wallstone, cold, cutting you off from the village's bustle. You've seen nuns at the market, their eyes downcast, escorted by a stern sister. They don't gossip, don't marry, don't starve, but they don't live, not the way you know. You think about old Maud, the spinster scraping by, and realize the convent might spare you her poverty, but not her isolation. The church's warnings about spinsterhood sins loom, but so do the convent's rules, a different kind of leash. Joke number 2. If the nunnery's freedom, it's the kind where you're free to pray and scrub, not much else. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The convent's door is open, but its narrow dowry vows a life of rules you're not sure you can keep. You think about your mother's hint, the priest's candle, and wonder if they see the nunnery as salvation or just a way to tidy you away. The village's judgment, those well-side whispers, would fade behind cloister walls. But you'd lose the sun on your face, the goat's annoying bleat, even your brother's teasing. You spin the wool, the thread tightening, and brace for the choice ahead. Joke number 3. If the convent's a path, it's paved with prayers and no shortcuts. For now, you keep spinning. The looms clack a reminder of the world you might leave. Unsure if the nunnery's rules are a refuge or a new kind of trap. You're still in the cottage, the spindle idle in your lap, the wool remember that half-spun tangle slipping through your fingers as you stare at the hearth's dying embers. The smoky air curls around your wool dress, still itchy and damp. And the convent's strict rules, those vows of chastity and endless prayers, linger like a heavy fog. The priest's unlit candle on the table catches the morning light, a reminder of the church's reach, while your mother's loom clacks on, her glance flickering with unspoken worry. The village's scorn, your parents' pleas, and the grim prospect of spinsterhood's poverty have pushed you to consider the nunnery. But now, as the village's bustle grows outside, you're exploring another path. Beguine communities. These groups of independent women, whispered about by a travelling weaver last summer, offer a life neither married nor cloistered, and you're wondering if they could be your escape. In medieval Europe, beguines were laywomen who lived in communal houses, especially in the Low Countries and parts of Germany by the 13th century, choosing piety and work over marriage or convents without taking formal vows. For a peasant like you, a beguine life meant living with other women, spinning, weaving, or nursing, pooling resources to survive outside the church's rigid control. A quirky tidbit, Beguines often wore a grey mantle, a simple cloak marking their status. Less binding than a nun's habit, but enough to dodge village gossip, picturing one over your patched dress, hoping it'd quiet the sneers. Historians still argue whether Beguines were proto-feminists or just pragmatic survivors, but as you set the spindle down, their independence calls like a faint song. You stand, stretching your sore back, and step to the cottage's open door, the air sharp with wood smoke and spring earth. The weavers' tales painted Beguines as women who prayed but also laughed, worked but kept their earnings, lived free of husbands or abbesses. There's a Begin house a few towns away, near a market town, where women tend the sick or sell cloth. You think back to the convent's rules, those stone walls and fasting, and compare them to this shared hearths, no vows, a life you might shape. The village's judgment, those women's mutters about cursed spinsters, might not reach you there, but it's a long walk, and you'd need coin or courage to start. You lean against the doorframe, the wood splintery under your palm, and imagine the begging house, wooden benches, a communal loom, women chatting over soup. It's not riches, but it's not old Maud's crumbling hut either. You'd spin wool, like now, but sell it yourself, maybe learn to dye or sew. The church tolerates Beguines, barely, seeing them as useful but suspicious, still free for nuns, too pious for wives. You think about the miller's son, his drunken leers, and know you'd rather face a Beguine's hard work than his temper. Joke number 1. If Beguines are rebels, you're ready to join their sewing circle. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you step back inside, your mother's loom still clacking. She hasn't mentioned Beguines' convent or marriage. That's her world, but the weaver's words give you a spark of hope. The catch is getting there. No dowries needed, but you'd need a patron or a skill to prove your worth. Your spinning's decent, but not market grade, and your family's barley won't fund the journey. You think about the priest's warnings, his talk of God's plan, and wonder if he'd approve of Beguines or call them heretics. You've heard rumors of Beguines being watched, their houses searched for sinful books. Joke number 2. If Beguines are free, it's the kind with a bishop peeking over your shoulder. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight familiar but heavier now. The boggeen path is tempting work, community, no miller's son but. It's not a sure thing. You'd leave the village, your family, the goat's annoying bleat, for a life that's still uncertain. You think about the well, the church, the spinsters, poverty, and realize Beguines offer a middle way, if you can reach it. The village's scorn would fade, but new challenges, suspicion, labor, survival would rise. Joke number 3. If Beguines are a haven, it's one you'll have to weave yourself. For now, you spin the wool, the looms clack a steady pulse, and hold the begging dream like a fragile thread, unsure if it'll lead you out or snap under the village's weight. You're still by the cottage door, the spindle back in your hands, the wool remember that half-spun skein, twisting unevenly as you lean against the splintery frame. The smoky hearth behind you crackles faintly, the priest's unlit candle. On the table, a silent judge, and your wool dress itches under the morning's growing warmth. The bee-game communities, with their grey mantles and shared hearths, shimmer like a distant hope, a way to dodge the miller's son and the convent's vows. But now, as the village's bustle carts rumbling, voices rising filters through the open door, you're facing the risks of that path. Beguine life, free of husbands but not of suspicion, comes with its own dangers. And you're wondering if trading the villagers' scorn for a new kind of scrutiny is a gamble you can afford. In medieval Europe, beguines lived on society's edges, especially by the 13th century, when their independence living without vows or mal-controlled drew both admiration and distrust. While they worked as weavers, nurses, or teachers, beguines faced accusations of heresy or immorality from church. Officials wary of women outside traditional roles. A quirky tidbit: some beguines wore a pledge ring, a plain band symbolizing their commitment to their community. Not a husband jewel picturing one on your finger, simpler than the miller's iron betrothal ring. Historians still argue whether beguines were targeted for their beliefs or just their freedom, but as you spin the wool, the threat of suspicion feels like a shadow over their shared looms. You step outside, the air sharp with wood smoke and damp earth, the village paths, alive with neighbors hauling baskets or herding goats. The beguine house, a few towns away, feels like a dream. But the weavers' tales included warnings, churchmen raiding beguine homes, searching for forbidden books, or townsfolk shunning them as loose women. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about spinsters, and realize beguines face a different gossip, darker, edged with fear of witchcraft or sin. You'd trade your patched dress for their grey mantle, but not if it paints a target on your back. Joke number 1. If beguines are free, it's the kind that comes with a bishop's side eye. You pause by the well, the bucket still damp from earlier, and glance at the church's stone tower. The priest's warnings about God's plan didn't mention beguines, but you've heard him rail against wayward women in sermons, and you're betting there on his list. Joining a beguine house means work spinning, nursing, maybe teaching children, but also defending your piety against prying clerics. You're no heretic, but you're not a nun either, and that middle ground's slippery. You think about old Maud, the spinster's poverty, and no beguines offer Mara shared hearth, a purpose, but at the cost of constant vigilance. You'd leave the miller's son's leers, but face new accusations instead. You hoist the bucket, water sloshing, and start back toward the cottage, the villager's eyes prickling your skin. The beguine life tempts you with independence, but the risks church scrutiny, social distrust, make your stomach twist. You've heard of beguines burned as heretics, though the weaver swore it was rare, more threat than reality. Still, you're a peasant with no allies, no coin to bribe a lenient priest. You think about your mother's convent hint, its stone walls safer but suffocating, and wonder if beguines are just a boulder trap. Joke number 2. If beguines are rebels, you're hoping for a rebellion with fewer bonfires. You step inside, the cottage's smoke curling around you, your mother's loom still clacking. She doesn't know about beguines, or she'd call them reckless, but her silence about your refusal gives you room to dream. The spindle's weight grounds you, a reminder of the work you do, their wool cloth, maybe healing Sab's butt. Also, the whispers you'd face, the village's scorn, your parents' pleas, the church's rules, they're all pushing you toward marriage or cloister. But beguines carve a third path, fraught with its own perils. You'd think about the miller's son, the convent's vows, and know you'd risk suspicion for a chance at their life. Joke number 3. If beguines are a haven, it's one guarded by gossips and grim bishops. For now, you spin the wool, the well's water dripping by the door, and weigh the beguine risks against the village's tightening noose. You're back in the cottage, the spindle twirling slowly, the wool remember that uneven thread, piling in your lap as you sit by the smoky hearth. The bucket of well water by the door drips, a faint echo of the village's scorn, and your wool dress, still damp and itchy, clings to your skin. The Beguine communities, with their grey mantles and risky freedom, shimmer like a half-dream, but their dangerous church, suspicion, whispers of heresy, have you hesitating. The priest's unlit candle on the table glints in the morning light, a reminder of the church's reach, while your mother's loom clacks on, her silence heavy with worry. Now, as the village's bustle grows, outside cows lowing, voices shouting, you're turning your thoughts to widows, women who've tasted marriage but gained a rare autonomy by losing their husbands. Their lives, whispered about at the market, seem like a distant star, and you're wondering if their freedom could ever be yours. In medieval Europe, widows held a unique status, especially by the 14th century, when they could inherit property or manage businesses, enjoying more autonomy than wives or spinsters, though still under social and legal constraints. For a peasant like you, widowhood meant freedom from a husband's rule, but not from the village's expectations. And it required surviving marriage, first a risky bet with the miller's son. A quirky tidbit: some widows wore a wimple veil, a headscarf marking their status, signaling respectability but also independence here, picturing one on Agnes, the crolifing neighbor who runs her own stall. Historians still argue whether widowhood offered true agency or just traded one burden for another, but as you spin the wool, their freedom feels like a taunt. You shift on the stool, the fire's embers barely warm, and glance at your mother, her loom's rhythm a steady pulse. She's no widow, but she's told you about Agnes, widowed young when her husband fell drunk into a ditch. Now Agnes sells eggs and herbs, her cottage tidy, her laughter sharp enough to fend off gossips. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about spinsters, and compare them to Agnes's brisk nod at the market. She's respected, not pitied, her wimple veil a shield. Widowhood seems a golden path. No miller's son, no convent vows, just a hearth of your own. But getting there means marrying first, and the thought of his leers makes your stomach churn. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the hearth, stirring the embers to coax a flame. Widowhood's freedom comes at a cost: surviving a husband, childbirth, maybe his debts. You've seen widows struggle. One lost her land to a greedy brother-in-law, another begs at the church steps. But Agnes's stall, her quick wit, her coin purse, they're proof it's possible. You think about old Maud, the spinster's poverty, and the baggin's risks, and realize widowhood's the only path where you might hold land or trade without a man's leash. Joke number 1. If widowhood's freedom, you're hoping for a very short marriage. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the church's rules, the priest's warnings about duty. Widows aren't free from his sermons. They must stay chaste or risk scandal, but they can say no to remarriage, a power you crave. You imagine yourself like Agnes, bargaining at the market, your wimple veil flapping, no miller's son barking orders. But the catch is clear. You'd need to wed, then outlive him, dodging childbirths, dangers, or his fists. You think about your parents, please, their talk of security, and wonder if they'd approve of this grim plan. Joke number 2. If we're a prize, it's one you win by surviving the game. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside hums, children laughing, a cart creaking, and you picture Agnes's stall, her eggs gleaming in the sun. Widowhood's autonomy tempts you, but it's a distant shore, reachable only through a stormy sea of marriage. You think about the Beguine house, the convent's walls, and no widowhoods no surer than they are. The village's scorn, the church's grip, your family's fear, they all push you toward the miller's son, not a widow's veil. You spin the wool, the thread tightening, and brace for the reality that freedom, even Agnes's kind, might stay a dream. Joke number 3. If widowhood's a crown, you're stuck polishing someone else's first. For now, you keep spinning. The looms clack a steady beat, and hold the widow's life like a fragile hope, unsure if it's worth the cost. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle back in your hands, that will remember that tangled thread, twisting unevenly as you sit on the creaky stool. The fire's embers glow faintly, the smoky air curling around your itchy wool dress, and the priest's unlit candle on the table catches the morning light. The widow's fleeting autonomy, those tales of Agnes's market stole taunts you. But its cost, surviving a marriage to the miller's son, feels too steep. The beguine's risks and the convent's vows linger as half answers. But now, as the village's bustle grows outside, goats bleating, voices haggling, you're facing a darker pressure. Forced marriage. Your family, backed by the village's scorn and the church's rules, is tightening the noose, pushing betrothals you can't escape. And you're bracing for their next move to drag you to the altar. In medieval Europe, forced marriages were common, especially for peasants like you, where family survival, like your family's strip of barley, depended on alliances sealed by daughters' vows. By the 13th century, the church required consent for marriage, but consent was often coerced through family pressure, social shame, or even threats of abandonment. A quirky tidbit: some families used a betrothal, not a cord tied around a daughter's wrist, to symbolize the match you're dreading, your mother pulling one from her apron, her eyes already hinting at it. Historians still argue whether these knots were symbolic or outright intimidation, but as you spin the wool, the threat of force feels like a knot around your own throat. You shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother. Her looms clack. A relentless pulse. She's been quieter since the priest's summons, but her tight lips say she's plotting. The tanner's boy, she mutters, not meeting your eyes, and your stomach lurches. He's no better than the miller's son, gruff, older, with hands like oak bark, but your father's outside, talking to a neighbor who's likely the tanner's kin. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about spinsters, and realize your family's done asking, they're ready to push. The tanner's land could ease your family's hunger, and you're the price. Joke number 1. If marriage is a trade, you're the barter nobody asked. You stand, setting the spindle down, and step to the hearth, stirring the embers to hide your shaking hands. Your parents' pleas have turned to plans, and the village's judgment, those whispers about cursed wombs, backs them up. You've heard of girls dragged to the church, there I do, forced through tears or threats of disownment. Your father's temper, your mother's fear, they're a united front now, and the tanner's boy is their new bargain. You think about the beguine house, its grey mantles, and the convent's stone walls, but both feel far away when your family's ready to tie that betrothal knot. The priest's candle looms, a reminder of the church's consent rule, but it's a hollow shield against your parents' will. The cottage's air is stifling, the smoke stinging your eyes, and you think about old Maud, the spinster shunned. For her refusal, your family won't let you become her knot, when land and honor are at stake. You hear your father's boots thud outside, his voice low with the neighbor, and know he's sealing a deal. The tanner's boy, with his rough hands and sour breath, is your new spectre. And saying no again might mean losing your place in this cottage. Joke number 2. If betrothals are knots, you're hoping for a blade to cut them free. You think about the widow's autonomy, Agnes's stall. But forced marriage blocks that path with a husband you'd have to outlive. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight no comfort now. The village outside hums children shouting, a cart rattling and you feel its walls closing in. Your mother's loom pauses, her eyes meeting yours, and she says, you'll see reason soon. It's not a request, it's a warning. The church, the village, your family there, all conspiring to push you to the altar. And your refusals running out of room. You think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know neither's a choice you'd make. Joke number 3. If marriage is a dance, you're being dragged to the floor with no music. For now, you spin the wool, the hearth's embers fading, and brace for the forced betrothal looming like a storm over the village's muddy paths. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle trembling in your hands. The wool remember that uneven skein, slipping as you try to focus on its twist. The fire's embers are nearly dead, the smoky air thick in your itchy wool dress. And your mother's loom clacks on, her warning about seeing reason with the tanner's boy hanging heavy. The threat of forced marriage, those betrothal knots, and family pressure looms like a storm, drowning out the beguine's faint promise and the widow's distant autonomy. Now, as the village's midday bustle hums outside hammers clanging, voices bartering you're grappling with the legal chains that bind you. The laws of church and custom, tighter than any knot, make refusing marriage a battle you're ill-equipped to fight, and you're realizing how little room they leave for your defiance. In medieval Europe, marriage laws were a web of ecclesiastical and secular rules, especially by the 13th century, when the church's control over matrimony left women like you with few legal outs. Canon law required consent for a valid marriage, but courts often ignored coercion, prioritizing family alliances like your family's barley strip over individual will. A quirky tidbit, some women tried to void betrothals by claiming a pre-contract, swearing they'd already promised another man. You're tempted to invent a fictional suitor, but the priest's sharp eyes would sniff out the lie. Historians still argue whether these legal loopholes offered real escape or just gave courts a way to dismiss women's pleas. But as you spin the wool, the chains feel unbreakable. You shift on the stool, the hearth's faint heat barely reaching your legs, and glance at your mother, her loom's rhythm a relentless reminder of duty. She's mentioned the tanner's boy twice now, her voice edged with finality, and you know your father's outside, likely sealing the deal. The law's on their side. If you refuse, they can drag you to a church court where priests judge your obstinacy as sin. You've heard of girls fined or shamed for defying betrothals, their families forced to pay for their rebellion. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about spinsters, and realize the law's another whip, driving you toward the altar. Joke number 1. If consent's a law, it's written in ink only men can read. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door, the air sharp with wood smoke and damp mud. The village paths are busy merchants haggling, children dodging carts, but you feel trapped. The legal chains tighter than the village's scorn. Canon law says you must consent, but your family's threats disownment. Hunger make, yes, the only answer. You think about old Maud, the spinsters, poverty, and know the law won't save you from her fate either. It's built to keep women wed or cloistered. The Beguine house, the convent's walls there beyond reach if your family pushes. A betrothal through you imagine a church court, the priest's flinty stare, and shudder at the thought of swearing your soul to the tanner's boy. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the pre-contract trick, a desperate dodge you'd never pull off. You've no witnesses, no coin for bribes, and the tanner's family would cry foul. The law's a maze, designed to trap you in marriage or punish your refusal. You've heard of noblewomen twisting legal loopholes, but for a peasant like you, it's a dead end. You think about your parents' pleas, the church's warnings, and realize the law's their silent ally, locking you in place. Joke number 2. If laws are chains, you're shackled with no key in sight. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight no comfort now. The village outside hums, a dog barks, a hammer falls, and you feel its legal web tightening. Your mother's loom pauses, her eyes meeting yours, and she says, "The tanner's coming tomorrow." It's not a question, it's a sentence. The church, the village, the law, they're all pushing you toward a vow you can't stomach. You think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know the law doesn't care which one claims. You spin the wool, the thread taut, and brace for the betrothal's legal grip. Joke number 3. If marriage is a contract, you're signing with invisible ink and no choice. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's embers cold, and face the laws that bind you tighter than any rope. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle back in your trembling hands, the wool, remember, that taut, uneven thread, twisting as you try to steady your nerves. The smoky air clings to your itchy wool dress, the fire's embers barely alive, and your mother's loom clacks with a rhythm that feels like a countdown to the tanner's visit tomorrow. The legal chains of marriage, those hollow consent laws and betrothal knots, have you trapped, and the threat of forced marriage to the tanner's boy with his oak bark hands looms darker than the miller's son's leers. Now, as the village's midday bustle hums outside, bells tolling, voices haggling, you're facing a new spectre, church courts. Your refusal to marry could land you before ecclesiastical judges, and the thought of their stern robes and probing questions makes your heart race like a startled hare. In medieval Europe, church courts held sway over marriage disputes, especially by the 13th century, when canon law governed betrothals and defiance was treated as a spiritual failing. For a peasant like you, refusing a match could trigger a trial where priests scrutinized your motives, often siding with family or suitor to uphold social order, like your family's barley strip. A quirky tidbit: some courts used a truth candle lit during testimony to reveal l'issue, picturing the priest's unlit candle on the table, wondering if it's destined for your trial. Historians still argue whether these courts protected women's consent or just enforced patriarchal control. But as you spin the wool, control feels like the winner. You shift on the stool, the hearth's faint heat fading, and glance at your mother. Her looms clack, unrelenting. Her words about the tanner's visit weren't a suggestion. They were a verdict, and you know the church court's next if you keep saying no. You've heard stories a girl from a nearby village hauled before a bishop's bench, her refusal branded obstinacy, fined until her family begged her to wed. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about spinsters, and realize a court's judgment would amplify their scorn, painting you as a sinner, not just stubborn. Your hands shake, the spindle wobbling. Joke number 1. If courts are fair, you're hoping for a judge who's bad at lighting candles. You stand, setting the spindle down, and step to the cottage's open door, the air sharp with wood smoke and mud. The village paths buzz, merchants shouting, children dodging carts, but you feel caged. The church courts threat tighter than any law. If your family drags you there, you'll face priests like the one who lectured you, his flinty eyes peeling. Back your soul, they'll ask why you refuse piety, pride, a secret lover, and your truth, that the tanner's boy's temper scares you, won't sway them. The church wants marriages, heirs, order, not your fears. You think about old Maud, the spinster's poverty, and know a court's fine could push you closer to her hut, or worse, force you to the altar. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about that truth candle, a trick to make you confess or crumble. You've no allies, no coin for bribes, no kin with church connections. Then the tanner's family would back your parents, their land deal at stake. You think about the beguine house, the convent's walls, but a church court could block those paths, labeling you unfit for either. You've heard of women exiled for defiance, their names erased from village talk. You glance at your mother, her loom pausing, and wonder if she'd stand by you or plead for the tanner's boy to save face. Joke number 2. If trials are holy, you're praying for a very forgiving saint. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight no solace now. The village outside hums, a dog barks, a hammer falls, and you feel the court's shadow looming. The priest's warnings about God's plan, your parents' threats, the village's scorn, they're all funneled through the church's legal arm, pushing you toward a vow you dread. You think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know a court wouldn't care which one you face, as long as you kneel. You spin the wool, the thread snapping, and brace for the trial that might follow your next refusal. Joke number 3. If church courts are justice, you're hoping for a miracle or a very short hearing. For now, you keep spinning the hearths, embers cold, and face the legal threat that could drag you to the altar or break you entirely. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle clutched tightly, the wool, remember that snapped thread, tangled in your lap as you sit on the creaky stool. The smoky air stings your eyes, your wool dress itchy and damp, and the hearth's embers are cold, mirroring the chill of the church court's threat looming over your refusal to marry the tanner's boy. Your mother's loom clacks on, her warning about his visit tomorrow a heavy weight, and the legal chains, those hollow consent laws, feel tighter than ever. Now, as the village's midday bustle fades, outside carts, slowing, voices softening, you're staring down a grimmer prospect, exile. Your defiance could push you beyond the village's muddy paths, cast out as a pariah, and the thought of wandering alone, with no hearth or kin, makes your hands tremble on the spindle. In medieval Europe, exile was a real punishment for women who defied social norms, especially by the 14th century, when villages like yours relied on conformity to maintain order, like your family's barley strip. Refusing marriage could lead to banishment, formal or informal, as communities shunned those who threatened their web of alliances. A quirky tidbit: some exiles were given a wanderer's mark, a cloth patch sewn on their cloak to warn others of their status. You're picturing one on your dress, a scarlet badge of rebellion. Historians still argue whether exile was a legal sentence or just social ostracism. But as you stare at the hearth, the prospect of being driven out feels like a sentence either way. You shift, the stool groaning, and glanced at your mother, her loom's rhythm faltering as she catches your eye. She hasn't mentioned exile, but her tight lips hint at the stakes your refusal could cost the family more than land. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about cursed spinsters, and realize their scorn could turn to outright rejection if you keep saying no. You've heard tales of women cast out a girl from a neighboring village, sent away for spurning a suitor, now begging on distant roads. Her name's a whisper, a warning, and you're starting to feel like her shadow. Joke number 1. If exiles. A journey, you're hoping for a map and better shoes. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door. The air cooler now, laced with the scent of damp straw and distant rain. The village paths are quieter, but you spot neighbors glancing your way, their eyes sharp with judgment. Exile doesn't always mean a priest's decree. It can be a slow push, no one trading with you, no one offering a seat at the feast. You think about old Maud, the spinster on the village's edge, and realize she's half exiled already, her hut a step from oblivion. Refusing the tanner's boy could shove you past her, out where the fields turn wild and strangers don't care if you starve. You grip the doorframe, its wood splintery, and wonder how far defiance can carry you before it breaks you. The cottage's smoke curls around you, and you think about the church court, its truth candle waiting to expose your obstinacy. A guilty verdict could mean fines your family can't pay, or a formal banishment, stripping you of home and name. You think about the Beguine house, the convent's walls. But exiles don't get to choose, they wander, marked by shame or that wanderer's patch. You've no coin, no kin beyond this village, and the road's danger's bandits. Hunger loom larger than the tanner's temper. You glance at your mother, her loom silent now, and wonder if she'd beg you to marry to save you from this fate. Joke number 2. If exile's freedom. It's the kind that comes with wolves and no blanket. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight a faint anchor. The village outside hums, softly a child laughs, a cow lows and you feel its borders closing in, your parents' pleas, the priest's warnings. The villagers scorn, they're all pushing you toward the altar or the road. You think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know neither's worth the price of staying, but exile's cost might be higher. You spin the wool, the thread fragile, and brace for the moment when defiance could cast you out, leaving you to face a world that's no kinder than the village's muddy paths. Joke number 3. If exile's a story, you're hoping for a hero, not a tragic ending. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's cold embers a mirror of your uncertain future, and face the grim prospect of a life beyond the village's reach. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle back in your hands. The wool remember that fragile thread, twisting unevenly as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The cold embers mirror the dread of exile, those wanderers, patches, and lonely roads lingering from your thoughts of being cast out for refusing the tanner's boy. The smoky air is thick, your mother's loom silent now, her warning about his visit tomorrow a stone in your chest. The church court's threat and the village's scorn tighten the noose. But now, as the village's afternoon hum softens, outside birds chirping, footsteps fading, you're facing another harsh reality, work's meager options. As a spinster defying marriage, your labor choices are few and grueling, and you're wondering how you'll scrape by without a husband's support or a family's hearth. In medieval Europe, work for unmarried women was limited, especially for peasants like you who lacked the skills or status for hyping trades. By the 14th century, spinsters often toiled as spinners, servants, or alewives, earning just enough to avoid starvation, but rarely enough for independence, leaving you tethered to family or charity. A quirky tidbit: some spinsters became rushlight makers, twisting reeds into cheap candles sold for pennies. Old mods, known for them, her hands stained with tallow. Historians still argue whether such work offered agency or just prolonged poverty, but as you spin the wool, the prospect of endless toil for scraps feels like a sentence all its own. You shift the stool groaning and glance at the unlit priest's candle on the table. Its wax, a mocking reminder of the church's grip. Your mother's at the door now, haggling with a neighbor over a sack of oats, her voice sharp but tired, spinning. Wool, like you're doing, is your most likely path. Hours at the distaff, your fingers raw, trading skeins for bread or firewood. You've seen Maud at the market, her wool skeins thin and cheap, barely fetching a loaf. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about cursed spinsters, and realize work won't shield you from their scorn. It'll just wear you down faster. Joke number 1. If spinning's a career, you're aiming for employee of the century with no pay. You stand, setting the spindle down, and step to the hearth, poking the cold embers as if they could spark a solution. Other jobs are worse. Scrubbing pots as a servant in a wealthier home, your back breaking for a corner to sleep in, or brewing ale like Maud, stirring vats for drunkards who haggle over pennies. You've helped your mother clean the tanners. Floors once his boy leering the whole time. Man, the memory makes you shudder. Work's not just labor, it's exposure, leaving you open to the villagers' judgment and men's wandering hands. You think about the Begine house, their weaving collectives, but getting there feels as distant as the widow's autonomy you envied. The cottage's smoke curls around you, and you think about rushlight making, picturing yourself dipping reeds in tallow, your hands greasy, your eyes strained. It's honest work, but it's a step above begging, and the village would still whisper about poor spinster you. You think about your parents' pleas, the church's warnings, and no work's meager wages won't ease their fear or yours. Without marriage, you're locked out of the village's wealthland, mills, market sand. Your labor's just a bandage on a wound that won't heal. Joke number 2. If work's a ladder, you're climbing one with half the rungs missing. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight heavier now. The village outside is quieter, dog yaps. A child hums and you feel its opportunities shrinking. Your mother steps back inside, her face lined, and says nothing, but her silence screams, you're a burden. You think about the tanner's boy, his rough hands, and know you'd rather spin until your fingers bleed than marry him. But work's, option spinning, serving, brewing are a slow grind toward Maud's fate. Her hut a warning at the village's edge. You spin the wool, the thread thin, and brace for a life of toil that offers no escape from the village's grip. Joke number 3. If labor's a song, you're stuck singing the chorus with no melody. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's cold embers a mirror of your dwindling hopes, and face the meager work that awaits a woman who dares to say no. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle trembling in your hands. The will remember that thin, uneven thread, slipping as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The cold embers reflect the grind of meager work spinning, serving rushlight making that awaits you as a spinster. While the smoky air stings your eyes, heavy with your mother's silent judgment, the threat of the tanner's boy, the church court's shadow, and the spectre of exile have tightened the village's grip. And now, as the afternoon's quiet hum drifts, outside birds settling, footsteps fading, you're facing another grim reality. Charity's cold comfort. Refusing marriage leaves you dependent on the village's alms or family scraps. and the thought of begging for survival with no hearth of your own makes your heart sink like a stone in the well. In medieval Europe, charity was a lifeline for the destitute, especially by the 14th century, when churches and wealthier households offered alms bread, broth, or cast-off clothes to the poor, including spinsters like you who defied marriage. But charity came with shame, tying you to the village's pity and reinforcing your status as a burden. A quirky tidbit: some churches gave out alms tokens, wooden chits traded for food, marked to track who received aid, your picturing one in your hand, branded with your failure. Historians still argue whether charity empowered communities or just controlled the poor. But as you spin the wool, the prospect of relying on it feels like a leash, not a lifeline. You shift, the stool groaning, and glance at the priest's unlit candle on the table, its wax a silent reminder of the church's role in your fate. Your mother's back at the loom, her clack resuming, her silence louder than any lecture. Without marriage, you're eating her porridge, sleeping under her roof, and every bite's a debt you can't repay. The village's charity church handouts, a neighbor's stale bread won't free you. It'll just chain you to their stairs. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about cursed spinsters, and realize begging would sharpen their scorn, turning you into old Maud's shadow. Her hands outstretched at the church steps. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the hearth, poking the cold embers as if they could spark a way out. You've seen Cheruti's face, the priest doling out broth after mass, his eyes judging each taker, or a merchant's wife tossing crusts with a sniff. You helped your mother once, carrying alms to a sick widow, and saw her flinch at the pity in your eyes. That's your future, queuing at the church, clutching an alms token, your wool dress patched thinner each year. You think about the tanner's boy, his rough hands, and know you'd rather beg than marry him, but charity's no life, just a slow fade. Joke number 1, if alms are mercy, they come with a side of smugness. The cottage's smoke curls around you, and you think about your family's strain, your father's grumbling, your brother's sidelong glances. They're barely scraping by, and your refusal means one more mouth to feed. Charity might start here, with their grudging porridge, but it'll end with you at the village's mercy, dependent on those who scorn you. You think about the Begine house, their shared hearths, or the convent's vows, but both need coin, or courage you don't have. The church's alms, tied to sermons about sin, won't fill your belly or warm your hands. You glance at your mother, her looms clack a reminder of her labor, and wonder how long her charity, her love will hold before it turns to resentment. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight heavier now. The village outside is hushed to cow lows, a child hums, and you feel its generosity shrinking. You think about old Maud, her rushlights barely earning a crust, her outstretched hand a village fixture. Charity's cold comfort won't save you from her fate. It'll just dress it in pity. You spin the wool, the thread frail, and brace for a life where every alms token's a reminder of what you've lost: home, respect, a place. You think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and no charities no better than their chains. Joke number 2, if alms are a gift, you're hoping for a return policy. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's cold embers a mirror of charity's hollow promise, and face the dependence that awaits a woman who dares to say no. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle clutched tightly, the wool, remember that frail thread, tangling in your lap as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The cold embers echo the hollow promise of charity's alms tokens, while the smoky air stings your eyes. Heavy with your mother's looming silence about the tanner's boy, the village's scorn, the church court's threat, and the grind of meager work have you trapped. And now, as the afternoon's quiet hum drifts outside a soft breeze, distant voices you're facing a darker shadow. Witchcraft, rumors, your refusal to marry, a defiance of the village's order, risks painting you as a witch, a label that could turn whispers into accusations. And you're bracing for the suspicion that's already creeping through the village's muddy paths. In medieval Europe, witchcraft accusations were a growing fear, especially by the 14th century, when women who defied norms like marriage or piety were often suspected of dark arts, their independence seen as unnatural. For a peasant like you, refusing the tanner's boy could spark rumors of spells or curses, especially in a village quick to blame misfortune on wayward women. A quirky tidbit: some accused women were tested with a witch's knot, a rope tied in a special way to see if it unraveled. You're picturing one around your wrist, a trap you can't untie. Historians still argue whether these accusations were rooted in fear or just a tool to control defiant women. But as you spin the wool, the rumor's weight feels like a noose. You shift, the stool groaning, and glance at your mother, her loom still silent, her eyes darting to the door. She's heard the whispers. Too, you caught a neighbor muttering about cursed spinsters at the well, hinting your refusal might have soured the miller's crops. You think back to those sneers, their words sharp as thorns, and realize witchcraft. Rumors could turn their scorn deadly. You've heard of a woman in a nearby village accused of hexing a cow after spurning a suitor. Her hut burned before she fled. Your hands shake. The spindle wobbling joke. Number 1. If you're a witch, your only spells making terrible wool skeins. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the hearth, poking the cold embers as if they could burn away the fear. The villagers, quick to point fingers, bad harvests, sick children, anything could be pinned on you now. You think about old Maud, the spinster on the village's edge, her rushlights barely keeping her alive. She's dodged witchcraft rumors, but her hunched figure's a warning. One wrong step, and you're her, or worse. The church's warnings, the priest's flinty stare, fueled these suspicions. He'd call your defiance sin, maybe even sorcery. You imagine a witch's knot, its loops tightening, and wonder how you'd prove your innocence to a village already judging you. The cottage's smoke curls around you, and you think about the tanner's boy, his rough hands a safer cage than a witch's trial. You've heard of accused women facing water testied and dunked in a river, or worse, burned if they couldn't charm a priest. Your family's barley won't buy a defense, and your mother's silence suggests she's scared too. You think about the Beguian house, their grey mantles, but even they face heresy whispers, and witchcraft's a step further. The villagers' eyes, those well-side gossips, are watching for a misstep, a strange look, a muttered curse, and you're walking a razor's edge. Joke number 2. If you're a witch, your broom's stuck sweeping this cottage. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight heavier now. The village outside is hushed, a bird trills, a cart creaks, and you feel its suspicion tightening. Your mother steps to the door, glancing back, and says, "Keep quiet, girl." It's a warning, not about noise, but about drawing attention. The church, the village, your family there, all waiting for you to bend or break. And witchcraft rumors could shatter you entirely. You think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and no marriage might shield you from this. But At what cost? You spin the wool, the thread thin, and brace for the whispers that could turn you from spinster to sorceress. Joke number 3. If witchcraft's a charge, you're hoping for a spell to vanish this village. For now, you keep spinning. The hearth's cold embers a mirror of your growing fear, and face the rumors that could burn hotter than any fire. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle trembling in your hands. The wool remember that thin, frayed thread, tangling as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The cold embers mirror the dread of witchcraft, rumors, those whispers of curses and witches, not swirling from your refusal to marry the tanner's boy. The smoky air stings your eyes, your mother's warning to keep quiet, heavy as the priest's unlit candle on the table. The village's scorn, the church court's threat, and charity's cold comfort have you cornered. And now, as the afternoon's quiet hum fades outside a soft wind, distant bells, you're grappling with another weight, family honor. Your defiance isn't just yours. It's tarnishing your kin, staining their name in the village's web, and you're bracing for the shame that's already seeping through the cottage walls. In medieval Europe, family honor was a fragile currency, especially for peasants like you, whose status, like your family's barley stripped, depended on collective respect within the village. By the 14th century, a daughter's refusal to marry could disgrace her kin, unraveling alliances and inviting scorn that hurt more than gossip. A quirky tidbit: some families hung a kin cloth, a woven strip with family symbols, above the hearth to display pride. You've seen one in your cottage, faded but proud, now feeling like a rebuke. Historians still argue whether honor was about loyalty or just social leverage, but as you spin the wool, the shame your refusal brings feels like a stain you can't scrub out. You shift the stool, groaning, and glance at your mother, now at the hearth, stirring a thin broth, her silence sharper than her loom's clack. She hasn't spoken since her warning, but her slumped shoulders say, enough. Your refusals, a wound to her pride, your father's name, your brother's future. You think back to the well, those women's sneers about spinsters, and realize they're not just judging you, they're shaming your family for failing to tame you. Your father's outside, his axe chopping wood with a fury you know is aimed at you. The kin cloth, with its crude stitching of your family's mark, hangs above the hearth, and you feel its weight. A reminder of the honor you're unraveling. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the hearth, poking the cold embers, as if they could burn away the guilt. Your refusal to marry the tanner's boy or the miller's son before him has cost your family more than land. It's cost them respect. You've heard of families shunned for less, a daughter who ran off, a son who's stolen. Now your kin face whispers at the market, fewer trades, colder nods. You think about old Maud, the spinster on the village's edge, her family long forgotten, and wonder if yours will fade too. Joke number 1. If honor's a cloak, your family's is patched and fraying fast. The cottage's smoke curls around you, and you think about the church's warnings, the priest's talk of duty tying your defiance to sin. Your family's honor is tangled with his rules. Marriage keeps the village's web intact, and you're snapping its threads. You imagine your brother, barely 12, facing taunts at the mill, or your mother bartering less grain because of your stubbornness. The tanner's boy, with his rough hands, might have saved their name, but you couldn't stomach the cost. You glance at the kin cloth, its symbols blurring in the dim light, and feel the shame like a weight on your chest. Joke number 2. If shame's a fire, your family's hearth is burning low. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight heavier now. The village outside is hushed at dog yaps. A cart creaks and you feel its judgment seeping through the walls. Your mother stirs the broth, her eyes avoiding yours. And you know she's counting the cost of your choice. Fewer allies, leaner. Winters, the church, the village, the witchcraft rumors, they're all piling on. But family honors the deepest cut, tying you to their pain. You think about the begging house, the convent's walls, and no, neither will erase the stain. You've left. You spin the wool, the thread frail, and brace for the shame that could break your family's fragile place in the village. Joke number 3. If honor's a song, you're singing off-key and out of tune. For now, you keep spinning the hearths. Cold embers a mirror of your family's tarnished pride, and face the growing weight of their disgrace. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle trembling in your hands. The wool remember that frail, tangled thread, slipping as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The cold embers reflect the weight of family honor, tarnished by your refusal to marry the tanner's boy. And the smoky air stings your eyes, heavy with your mother's silent broth stirring. The village's scorn, witchcraft, rumors, and the church court's threat have you cornered. And now, as the afternoon's hush deepens outside a soft breeze, fading voices, you're discovering a hidden spark, secret alliances, other women, defying marriage in quiet corners of the village, are forming a whispered network of resistance. And you're wondering if their courage could bolster your own against the tightening noose of expectation. In medieval Europe, women resisting marriage often found strength in covert bonds, especially by the 14th century, when shared defiance, whether against betrothals or social norms, created informal alliances among spinsters, widows, or outcasts. These women swapped advice, resources, or protection, carving out small pockets of support in a world demanding conformity, a quirky tidbit. Some formed sisterhood knots, braided cords exchanged as tokens of solidarity. You're picturing one hidden in your shift, a secret promise from a woman like you. Historians still argue whether these alliances were organized rebellions or just desperate camaraderie. But as you spin the wool, the idea of allies feels like a candle in the dark. You shift the stool, groaning, and glance at your mother, her broth simmering, her eyes fixed on the pot. She doesn't know about these women, or she'd call them reckless. But you've heard whispers at the market names, like Joan, a weaver who spurned a smith, or Marjorie, who fled a betrothal and lives on the village's edge. You think back to the well, those sneers about spinsters, and realize not all women there were judging. Some, like Joan's cousin, gave you a quiet nod, a hint of understanding. You've seen Joan at the market, her hands deft with thread, her laugh sharp, and wonder if she'd share her secrets. Joke number 1. If sisterhood's a club, you're hoping for an invite without a dress code. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door, the air cool, with the scent of damp earth and straw. The village paths are quiet now, but you imagine Joan or Marjorie in their own cottages, spinning or brewing, defying the same pressures. You've heard they meet sometimes, under cover of dusk, trading wool or advice on dodging suitors. Joining them could mean a lifeline, shared work, shared courage against the tanner's boy and your family's shame. You think about old Maud, the spinster shunned for her refusal, and wonder if she knows these women, if she's tied her own sisterhood knot. The church's warnings, the priest's flinty stare, might not reach their hidden circle, the cottages. Smoke curls around you, and you think about the kin cloth above the hearth, its symbols fading under your family's tarnished honor. These secret alliances offer a different kind of family, not blood, but choice. You've heard of women pooling coins to buy a loom or hiding a runaway from a church court. The risk is real gossip could turn to witchcraft, accusations, but their defiance sparks something in you. You think about the Beguine house, their grey mantles, but these alliances are closer. Rora, built on shared rebellion. Joke number 2. If allies are a shield, you're hoping for one that doesn't leak in the rain. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight lighter now. The village outside is hushed, a bird trills, a cart creaks, and you feel a flicker of hope. Your mother stirs the broth, her silence heavy, but you imagine Joan's nod, Marjorie's laugh, and wonder how to find them. The church, the village, the tanner's boyd, they're all pushing you toward the altar. But these women, with their sisterhood knots, offer a different path. You think about the miller's son, the church court, and know their courage could be your anchor. You spin the wool, the thread steadier, and brace for the chance to join their quiet rebellion. Joke number 3. If defiance is a song, you're ready to hum along with the chorus. For now, you keep spinning the hearths. Cold embers, a mirror of your growing resolve, and seek the women who might light your way through the village's shadows. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling slowly, the wool, remember, that steadier thread, piling in your lap as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The cold embers reflect the faint hope of secret alliances, those sisterhood knots and whispered rebellions sparked by women like Joan and Marjorie defying marriage. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's broth simmering, her silence heavy after her warning about the tanners. Boys visit. The village's scorn, witchcraft rumors, and family shame weigh heavy, but now, as the afternoon's hush deepens outside, a soft breeze, fading bells yaw, turning to folklore's defiant tales, stories of women who resisted marriage, woven into village lore, offer a thread of courage, and you're wondering if their legends could guide your own quiet rebellion. In medieval Europe, folklore was a living pulse, especially by the 14th century, when tales of rebel women, spinsters, runaways, or mythical heroines circulated among peasants like you, blending defiance with magic to challenge norms. These stories, told by hearths or at markets, gave women a way to imagine resistance, even if only in whispers. A quirky tidbit, some tales spoke of a moon cord, a charm braided under moonlight to protect a woman's freedom. You're picturing one hidden in your shift, a secret woven by Joan's deft hands. Historians still argue whether these tales were subversive or just escapist dreams, but as you spin the wool, their defiance feels like a spark against the village's chains. You shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother, her broth pot steaming, her eyes fixed on the hearth. She's told you stories before, tales of women like the weaver of Willow, who spurned a lord and lived free in the woods, or the maid of mist, who vanished rather than wed. You think back to the well, those sneers about spinsters, and realize some women there, like Joan's cousin, might whisper these tales too, their nods a hint of shared rebellion. You've heard Marjorie hum a ballad about a lass who outwitted a suitor with a riddle, her laughter sharp at the market. These stories aren't just fancy, they're armor, and you're craving their strength. Joke number 1. If folklore's a shield, you're hoping for one woven with dragon-proof thread. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door. The air cool with the scent of damp straw and earth. The village paths are quiet, but you imagine Joan or Marjorie by their own hearths, telling tales of women who defied betrothals or fled church courts. You've heard of the weaver of willow hiding in a forest, her looms singing under stars, or the maid of mist slipping through fog to dodge a priest's wrath. These women, real or not, fuel your resolve. Their moon cords, a symbol of freedom you'd not yourself if you knew how. You think about old Maud, the spinster shunned, and wonder if she knows these tales. If they keep her warm in her crumbling hut, the cottage's smoke stings your eyes. And you think about the kin cloth above the hearth, its faded symbols, a reminder of your family's shame. Folklore's tales offer a different legacy, not honor, but defiance, a way to stand against the tanner's boy and the church's rules. You've heard of women in stories cursing suitors with nettles or charming wolves, to guard their path while impossible but inspiring. The church calls such tales pagan, but the village women whisper them anyway. Their voices are quiet rebellion. You think about the secret alliances, Jones nod, and know these stories bind you to them. Joke number 2. If tales are magic, you're hoping for a spell that skips the frog-kissing part. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight lighter now. The village outside is hushed, a bird chirps, a dog yaps, and you feel a flicker of courage. Your mother stirs the broth, her silence heavy. But you imagine the weaver of willows laugh, the maid of mist's fog-cloaked escape, and wonder how to weave your own tale. The church, the village, the tanner's boy, they're all pushing you toward the altar, but folklore's defiant women light a different path. You think about the miller's son, the witchcraft rumors, and know their stories could be your guide. You spin the wool, the thread stronger, and brace for the rebellion these tales inspire. Joke number 3. If folklore's a map, you're ready to follow it, even if it leads through briars. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's cold embers, a mirror of your growing resolve, and draw strength from the village's whispered legends. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling steadily, the wool, remember, that stronger thread, piling neatly in your lap as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The cold embers glow faintly, warmed by the spark of folklore's defiant tales, those weaver of willow stories and moon cords stirring courage against the tanner's boy and your family's shame. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's broth pot simmering, her silence heavy after her warning about his visit tomorrow. The village's scorn, witchcraft rumors, and secret alliances have fueled your resolve. But now, as the late afternoon's hush settles outside, a soft breeze, distant lowing, you're facing the church's salvation promise. Its offer of spiritual reward for submission tempts you to marry, and you're wondering if its divine carrot could sway you from your defiance. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church framed marriage as a path to salvation, especially by the 14th century, when women like you were taught that bearing heirs and obeying husbands earned God's grace, while refusal risked eternal peril. For a peasant defying betrothals, the Church's promise of heaven for compliance was a powerful lure, backed by sermons and sacraments. A quirky tidbit: some priests gave blessing beads, small rosaries to brides-to-be to guide prayers. For a fruitful union you're picturing one in your hand, smoother than the priest's unlit candle on the table. Historians still argue whether these promises were genuine spiritual guidance or just tools to enforce conformity. But as you spin the wool, salvation's lure feels like a velvet trap. You shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother, her broth steaming, her her eyes fixed on the pot. She's leaned on the church's promises before, muttering about heaven's rewards when your father's temper flared. You think back to the well, those sneers about spinsters, and realize the church's salvation narrative underpins their scorn. Marriage is holy, defiance is sin. The priest's lecture, his warnings about Eve's fall, painted spinsterhood as a road to hell, but submission to the tanner's boy could, in theory, secure your soul. You've seen women at Mass, clutching rosaries, their faces serene with the promise of divine favor, and wonder if it's peace or surrender. Joke number 1. If salvation's a ticket, you're hoping for a seat without a tanner next to you. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the hearth, stirring the embers to coax a flame. The church's promise is everywhere. Mass, sermons, the cross above the door, foring eternal reward for a life of duty. You think about the tanner's boy, his rough hands, and know his temper's no heavenly gift. But the priest would say, enduring him is your cross to bear. You've prayed before, for rain, for your brother's fever, but praying for a husband feels like bargaining with a God who's already picked sides. You think about old Maud, the spinster shunned, and wonder if she ever fell for the church's lure, if she ever clutched blessing beads before choosing her lonely path. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the folklore tales, the weaver of willow's defiance clashing with the church's salvation script. Those stories gave you courage, but the church offers certainty. Marry, obey, and heaven awaits. You glance at the kin cloth above the hearth, its faded symbols tied to your family's shame, and wonder if salvation could mend their honor too. Your mother's faith, her quiet prayers, pulls you toward the church's promise, but your heart resists, tethered to Joan's nod and Marjorie's laugh. You think about the secret alliances, their sisterhood knots, and know the church's reward comes with chains. Joke number 2. If heaven's the prize, you're hoping for a loophole in the fine print. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside is hushed to cow lows, a child hums, and you feel the church's pull, soft but insistent. Your mother stirs the broth, her silence a plea to choose the safe path. The tanner's boy, the blessing beads, the villager's scorn, the witchcraft rumors, the family shame, they all push you toward salvation's promise, but folklore's defiance holds you back. You think about the miller's son, the church court, and know the church's law is a gilded cage. You spin the wool, the thread taut, and brace for the temptation to trade your rebellion for a heavenly reward. Joke number 3. If salvation's a deal, you're holding out for better terms. For now, you keep spinning the hearths. Faint embers, a mirror of your wavering resolve, and weigh the church's promise against your defiant heart. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling in your hands. The wool, remember that taut thread, piling neatly as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The faint embers flicker, warmed by the church's salvation promise, those blessing beads and heavenly rewards, tempting you to marry the tanner's boy and ease your family's shame. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's broth pot cooling, her silence heavy after her. Push toward the altar. The village's scorn, folklore's defiant tales, and secret alliances keep your resolve alive. But now, as the late afternoon's hush deepens outside a soft breeze, distant dogs barking, you're facing a new challenge, village men's resentment. Your refusal to marry, a slap to their pride and the village's order, stirs hostility from suitors like the tanner's boy. and you're bracing for their anger on the muddy paths ahead. In medieval Europe, men's status was tied to marriage, especially by the 14th century, when securing a wife like your family's barley strip meant land, labor, and respect. A woman's refusal, especially from a peasant like you, could spark resentment, as suitors saw it as a public insult, fueling grudges that rippled through the village. A quirky tidbit: some spurned men carved scorn marks, crude symbols, on a woman's fence to shame her. You're dreading one on your cottage door, a badge of the tanner's boy's wrath. Historians still argue whether this resentment was personal or a defense of patriarchal order. But as you spin the wool, the men's anger feels like a storm brewing just outside. You shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother, now mending a torn cloak, her eyes avoiding yours. She's heard the whispers two men at the alehouse grumbling about uppity lasses after you refused the miller's son, and now the tanner's boys likely adding fuel. You think back to the well, those women's sneers, and realize the men's resentment is sharper, more dangerous. You've seen the tanner's boy at the market, his oak bark hands clenched when you passed, his glare a promise of trouble. Your refusals not just a family shame, it's a challenge to his pride, and in this village, that's a spark to tinder. Joke number 1. If resentment's a fire, you're dodging flames without a bucket. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door, the air cool with the scent of damp earth and straw. The village paths are quiet, but you spot a group of men by the alehouse, their laughter rough, their eyes flicking your way. The tanner's boy's among them, his broad shoulders hunched, and you feel his anger like a weight. You think about old Maud, the spinster shunned, and wonder if she faced this two men's grudges turning neighbors against her. Your refusal threatens their world, where men choose and women obey, and the scorn mark's shadow looms. You grip the doorframe, its wood splintery, and brace for their hostility, knowing it's not just talk but a threat to your place here. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the church's salvation promise, its lure of peace through marriage. The men's resentment makes that path tempting if you wed the tanner's boy. Their anger might fade, your family's honor restored, but his glare, his rough hands, tell you it's a trap, trading one danger for another. You think about the folklore tales, the weaver of willow's defiance, and the secret alliances with Joan and Marjorie. Their sisterhood knots a quiet shield. Their courage helps, but the men's hostility is a louder foe, one that could turn violent or push you toward exile. Joke number 2. If men's pride is a castle, you're storming it with a spindle. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside is hushed, a bird chirps, a hammer falls, and you feel the men's resentment like a gathering storm. Your mother mends her cloak, her silence a plea to reconsider, but you think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know their anger's a price for your defiance. The church, the village, the family shame, they're all pushing you toward the altar. But the men's grudges add a sharper edge. You spin the wool, the thread steady, and brace for the hostility that could mark your door or drive you out. Joke number 3. If resentment's a song, the men are singing it louder than the church choir. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's faint embers a mirror of your flickering courage, and face the village men's wrath as you hold your ground. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling in your hands. The will remember that steady thread, piling neatly as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The faint embers glow, a dim echo of Your resolve against the village, men's resentments, those scorn marks, and the tanner's boys glare stirred by your refusal to marry. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's mended cloak now draped over a chair, her silence heavy. After her push toward the altar, the church's salvation promise, folklore's defiant tales, and the men's hostility weigh on you. But now, as the late afternoon's hush deepens outside, a soft breeze, fading footsteps, sure facing a new fear, property loss. Your defiance risks stripping your family of their land, like the barley strip tied to your dowry, and you're wondering how much your rebellion could cost those you love. In medieval Europe, property was the backbone of peasant life, especially by the 14th century, when land like your family's barley strip was often tied to marriage alliances, ensuring survival through shared fields and labor. A woman's refusal to marry could unravel these deals, leaving families vulnerable to losing land or rights to wealthier kin or lords. A quirky tidbit: some villagers used a land knot, a cord tied during betrothals, to symbolize the merging of fields. You're dreading your mother pulling one from her apron, a reminder of what's at stake. Historians still argue whether property loss was a legal penalty or just social pressure. But as you spin the wool, the threat of your family's land slipping away feels like a blade at your throat. You shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother, now at the hearth, stirring a fresh pot of porridge, her eyes avoiding yours. She's mentioned the tanner's boy's land deal twice, her voice tight with fear, and you know your father's been haggling with his kin. You think back to the well, those sneers about spinsters, and realize your refusal isn't just shaming your family, it's threatening their livelihood. The barley strip, barely enough for bread, was promised to the tanner's family, and without it, your parents face hunger or debt. The kin cloth above the hearth, its faded symbols, feels like a silent plea to save their legacy. Joke number 1. If land's a treasure, your defiance is digging a very deep hole. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door, the air cool with the scent of damp earth and straw. The village paths are quiet, but you spot your father by the fence, his shoulders slumped as he talks to a neighbor, likely the tanner's kin. Losing the barley strip could mean selling tools, begging alms, or worse, owing rent to a lord who's already eyeing their plot. You think about old Maud, the spinster shunned, her family's land long gone, and wonder if your refusal will push your kin to her fate. The tanner's boy, with his rough hands, might have secured the land, but his temper's no bargain. You grip the doorframe, its wood splintery, and feel the weight of property loss like a stone in your chest. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the church's salvation promise, its lure of peace through marriage. Marrying the tanner's boy could save the land, your family's honor, even quiet the men's resentment. But you think about the folklore tales, Joan's sisterhood knot, and no submission's a trap. The land knot, the church's rules. The village's web there, all tied to your dowry, and your refusals unraveling them. You've heard of families stripped of fields for a daughter's defiance, their names fading from the market's chatter. You glance at your mother, her porridge steaming, and wonder if she'd forgive you if the land's lost. Joke number 2. If property's a game, you're playing chess with no pieces left. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside is hushed, a bird trills, a cow lows, and you feel the land's fragility tightening your resolve. Your mother stirs the porridge, her silence a plea to reconsider. But you think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know their land deals aren't worth your soul. The church, the village, the men's grudges, they're all pushing you toward the altar, but property loss adds a sharper sting, threatening your family's survival. You spin the wool, the thread strong, and brace for the cost your defiance might exact on those you love. Joke number 3. If land's a story, you're writing a chapter nobody wants to read. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's faint. Embers a mirror of your family's fading security, and face the fear of losing the ground beneath their feet. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling in your hands. The wool remember that strong thread, piling neatly as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The faint embers flicker, a dim reflection of the fear of property loss, your family's barley strip at risk stirred by your refusal to marry the tanner's boy. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's porridge pot cooling, her silence heavy after her push to save the land. Through marriage, the village's scorn, the church's salvation promise, and the men's resentment weigh on you. But now, as the evening's hush settles outside a soft breeze, distant owls hooting, you're facing a new accusation. Madness claims your defiance, a thorn in the village's order, risks labeling you as unstable, and you're wondering how this stigma could twist your rebellion into a trap in medieval Europe. Madness was a catch-all for behavior that defied norms, especially by the 14th century, when women like you, refusing marriage, could be branded unstable to discredit their choices and justify control. For a peasant, such claims often spread by family or suitors could lead to confinement or forced compliance, undermining your agency. A quirky tidbit: some villagers used a moon test, observing a woman's behavior under a full moon to confirm madness, sure picturing the tanner's kin eyeing you at night, hoping for a wild dance to prove their point. Historians still argue whether madness claims were genuine fears or just tools to silence defiant women. But as you spin the wool, the threat of this label feels like a shadow creeping closer. You shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother. Now, at the loom, her clack resuming with a nervous edge. She hasn't said it outright, but her sidelong glances hint she's worried you're touched. A word you overheard her whisper to a neighbor. You think back to the well, those sneers about spinsters, and realize the village is primed to believe your mature refusals already unnatural in their eyes. The tanner's boy's kin, spurned by your no, might spread the rumor, claiming your hysteria explains it all. You've seen it before: a woman who laughed too loudly, shunned as moonstruck, her voice ignored, your hands tremble. The spindle wobbling joke number 1. If madness is a crown, you're wearing it with zero flair. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the hearth, poking the faint embers as if they could burn away the fear. Madness claims aren't just gossip, they're a weapon. If the village buys it, you could lose more than land: your voice, your place, your freedom. You've heard of women locked in attics or sent to monasteries, their cure a priest's prayers or worse. You think about old Maud, the spinster, on the village's edge, her muttering dismissed as madness, and wonder if your refusal's pushing you toward her fate. The church's warnings, the priest's flinty stare, would back the claim defying God's plan is crazy, after all. You imagine a moon test, the village watching, and shudder at the thought of proving your sanity under their gaze. The cottages. Smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the folklore tales. The weaver of willow's defiance, a shield against these accusations. But madness claims could drown them out, turning your rebellion into a symptom. You think about the secret. Alliances, Joan's nod, Marjorie's laugh, and wonder if they've dodged this label or worn it proudly. The tanner's boy's anger, the village's scorn. They'd leap at the chance to call you mad, silencing your no with a single word. You glance at your mother, her looms clack faltering, and fear she might agree, desperate to save the families. Honor. Joke number 2. If madness is a play, you're hoping for a script rewrite. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside is hushed to bird calls, a dog yaps, and you feel the madness labels. Threat tightening. Your mother's loom resumes, her silence a plea to conform. But you think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know their chains are no saner than your defiance. The church, the village, the property loss, they're all pushing you toward the altar, but madness claims add a cruel twist, threatening to steal your mind's legitimacy. You spin the wool, the thread steady, and brace for the stigma that could lock you away or break your resolve. Joke number 3. If madness is a song, you're singing it solo with no applause. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's faint. Embers a mirror of your fragile courage, and face the fear of being branded unstable for daring to say no. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling in your hands, the wool remember that steady thread. Piling neatly as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The faint embers flicker, a dim echo of the madness claims those moon tests and whispers of instability, threatening to brand your refusal of the tanner's boy as lunacy. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's loom silent now, her porridge pot cold after her push to save the family's honor through marriage. The village's scorn, property loss, fears, and secret alliances keep you defiant. But now, as the evening's hush deepens outside a soft breeze, distant owls hooting you're facing a new trap, guardianship's iron grip. Your defiance risks placing you under a male relative's control, stripping what little freedom you have. And you're wondering how to dodge this chain tightening around your rebellion in medieval Europe. Guardianship was a common fate for women defying norms, especially by the 14th century, when unmarried women like you could be placed under a father, brother, or uncle's authority to correct their behavior and protect family interests, like your barley strip. For a peasant, this meant losing agency over your labor, movements, or choices, as men enforced compliance or marriage. A quirky tidbit. Some guardians tied a ward knot, a cord around a woman's wrist, to mark their control you're picturing. Your brother, barely 12, fumbling one onto you at your father's command. Historians still argue whether guardianship was protective or just patriarchal control, but as you spin the wool, it feels like a cage closing in. You shift the stool, creaking, and glance at your mother, now mending a torn blanket, her eyes avoiding yours. She hasn't mentioned guardianship, but her silence screams desperation. Your refusals cost the family land and honor, and she might see a guardian as a last resort. You think back to the well, those sneers about spinsters, and realize the village would nod at a male relative stepping in, calling it proper. Your father's outside, his axe silent now, but you've heard him mutter about handling you. Your brother, young as he is, could be named your keeper if your parents push, his boyish hands holding your fate. Joke number 1. If guardianship's a leash, you're hoping for a very clumsy dog. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door. The air cool with the scent of damp earth and straw. The village paths are quiet, but you imagine your father talking to the tanner's kin, plotting to hand you over to a guardian's control. Guardianship means no more trips to the well alone, no spinning for your own coin, every move watched, every no silenced. You think about old Maud, the spinster shunned, and wonder if she dodged guardianship or just outlived her keepers. The church's warnings, the priest's flinty stare, would back this move. Defiance is sin, and a guardian's guidance is holy. You grip the doorframe, its wood, splintery, and feel the grip of control tightening like a knot around your wrist. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the folklore tales, the weaver of willows' defiance, a shield against madness claims, and now this threat. Guardianship could crush your secret alliances with Joan or Marjorie, their sisterhood knots useless if you're locked in this cottage. You've heard of women placed under uncles, their days spent spinning for others, their dreams buried. Your brother's too young to wield real power, but your father's temper could enforce it, pushing you toward the tanner's boy or a cloister. You glance at your mother, her needle pausing, and fear she'd agree to save the barley strip. Joke number 2. If guardianship's a cage, you're hoping for a lock with a bad key. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside is hushed to bird calls, a dog yaps, and you feel the guardian's shadow looming. Your mother resumes mending, her silence a plea to conform. But you think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know their control's no better than a brother's. The church, the village, the madness rumors there, all pushing you toward submission. But guardianship's grip adds a new chain, threatening to bind your hands and will. You spin the wool, the thread strong, and brace for the control that could steal your defiance entirely. Joke number 3. If guardianship's a story, you're praying for a plot twist with no ward knots. For now, you keep spinning the hearths. Faint embers, a mirror of your dwindling freedom, and face the fear of a life under another's rule. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling in your hands, the wool, remember, that strong thread, piling neatly as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The faint embers glow, a dim shield against the threat of guardianship, those ward knots, and your brother's potential control, looming over your refusal to marry the tanner's boy. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's mended blanket draped nearby, her silence heavy after, her push to save the barley strip through marriage. The village's scorn, madness claims, and property loss fears weigh on you. But now, as the evening's hush deepens outside a soft breeze, distant crickets chirping, you're finding strength in resistance's small acts, quiet defiance, like spinning your own wool or seeking Joan's nod, keeps your rebellion alive. And you're wondering how these subtle moves could carve a path through the village's tightening grip in medieval Europe. Women resisting marriage often relied on small, covert acts to maintain agency, especially by the 14th century, when outright rebellion could lead to exile or guardianship. For peasants like you, these acts, bartering in secret, dodging suitors, or joining whispered networks, were lifelines in a world demanding conformity. A quirky tidbit: some women wove defiance threads, subtle patterns in their cloth. To signal resistance, you're picturing one in your skein, a secret only Joan might notice. Historians still argue whether these acts were intentional defiance or just survival tactics. But as you spin the wool, their quiet power feels like a spark against the village's chains. You shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother, now at the hearth, stirring a fresh pot of broth, her eyes avoiding yours. She doesn't see your resistance, spinning late to earn a few pennies. slipping to the market to catch Joan's eye, but these acts are your rebellion, small but sharp. You think back to the well, those sneers about spinsters, and realize your quiet defiance avoiding the tanner's boy's path, trading wool with Marjorie's cousin keeps you from breaking. You've woven no defiance thread yet, but your skeins tighter now, each twist a refusal to bend. You think about old Maud, her rushlights, a quiet stand against poverty, and wonder if she's woven her own secret patterns. Joke number 1. If defiance is a stitch, you're sewing with a very fine needle. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door. The air cool with the scent of damp earth and night-blooming flowers. The village paths are dark, but you imagine Joan at her loom, Marjorie brewing ale, their small axe hiding a coin, whispering advice, building a web of resistance. You've started bartering your wool at the market, a penny here, a loaf there, saving for a chance at the BGE house. These moves, unnoticed by the priest or your father, are your shield against the tanner's boy and guardianship's grip. You think about the folklore tales, the weaver of willows' moonlight knots, and know your defiance threads are weaving a similar story, one knot at a time. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the church's salvation. Promise, its lure of peace through marriage. Your small acts spinning extra skeins, seeking Joan's nod, reject that path, choosing rebellion over submission. You've dodged the tanner's boy twice at the market, your steps quick, your smile vague, and each escape feels like a victory. The village's men's resentment, the madness rumors, they can't touch these quiet moves, not yet. You glance at your mother, her broth simmering, and wonder if she'd notice your defiance if it saved the barley strip. Joke number 2. If resistance is a dance, you're stepping lightly with no music. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside is hushed at dog barks, an owl hoots, and you feel the power of your small axe growing. Your mother stirs the broth, her silence a plea to conform, but you think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know your defiance threads are stronger than their chains. The church, the village, the guardianship, threat, they're all pushing you toward the altar. But these quiet rebellions keep you free, for now. You spin the wool, the thread tight, and brace for the small axe that could light your path forward. Joke number 3. If defiance is a fire, you're kindling it with the tiniest sparks. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's faint embers, a mirror of your subtle courage, and draw strength from the resistance that hums beneath the village's watchful eyes. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling in your hands. The wool, remember that tight thread, piling neatly as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The faint embers glow, a soft echo of your small acts of resistance, those defiance threads and quiet. Market trades keeping your rebellion alive against the tanner's boy and guardianship's threat. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's broth pot cold, her silence heavy after her push to save the barley strip through marriage. The villagers' scorn, madness claims, and men's resentment press hard. But now, as the evening's hush deepens outside, a soft breeze, distant crickets chirping, you're noticing a subtle shift, the community's slow change. The villagers' views on spinsters, once rigid, are softening in small ways. And you're wondering if this shift could offer a crack of light for your defiance. In medieval Europe, social norms evolved slowly, especially by the 14th century, when economic shifts and urban growth began to loosen the grip of marriage as a woman's only path allowing some spinsters to find grudging acceptance in villages like yours. While still rare, communities occasionally tolerated unmarried women who contributed through work or piety, easing the stigma tied to your barley strips legacy. A quirky tidbit: some villages marked spinsters' homes with a hearth bloom, a dried flower hung on the door to signal their useful role. You're picturing one on Old Maud's hut, a quiet nod to her rush. Historians still argue whether this acceptance was pragmatic or a genuine cultural shift. But as you spin the wool, the community's change feels like a faint breeze through a locked window. You shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother, now at the loom, her clack resuming with a weary rhythm. She hasn't noticed the shift her world's still marriage or ruin, but you've seen it. A merchant's wife buying Joan's cloth without a sneer, or a neighbour trading bread for Marjorie's ale with a smile. You think back to the well, those sneers about spinsters, and realise some women there, like Joan's cousin, now offer nods instead of scorn. The village isn't embracing you, but it's starting to see spinsters as more than curses workers, weavers, healers. You've bartered your wool at the market, a penny earned, and felt a grudging respect in the trader's nod. Joke number 1. If acceptance is a feast, you're getting crumbs, but they're tasty. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door. The air cool with the scent of damp earth and night flowers. The village paths are dark, but you imagine Joan's loom humming, Marjorie's ale vats bubbling, their work softening the village's edges. You've heard of a spinster in a nearby town, her herb garden earning her a place at the market, her door marked with a hearth bloom. This shift isn't loud, no proclamations, no church blessings, but it's real. A slow turn toward tolerating women like you who defy the tanner's boy. You think about Old Maud, her rushlights a quiet stand, and wonder if she's felt this change, if her hut's bloom is new. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the church's salvation promise, its push for marriage clashing with this subtle shift. The village's men still grumble, the priest still preaches, but the community's needs cloth, ale, herbs are starting to outweigh their scorn. Your defiance threads, woven through market trades and Joan's nod, align with this change, giving you a sliver of space to stand. You glance at your mother, her loom's clack faltering, and wonder if she'd see hope in this shift or just more shame for the barley strip. You think about the secret alliances, their sisterhood knots, and know they're part of this slow turn. Joke number 2. If change is a river, you're wading in with soggy shoes. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside is hushed on owl hoots, a dog yaps, and you feel the community shift, like a faint pulse. Your mother resumes her loom, her silence a plea to conform. But you think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know this softening offers a chance to hold your ground. The church, the madness rumors, the guardianship threat there, still there, but the village's slow change gives you room to breathe. You spin the wool, the thread strong, and brace for the possibility of a place where spinsters aren't cursed. Joke number 3. If acceptance is a song, you're hearing the first faint notes. For now, you keep spinning, the hearth's faint. Embers a mirror of your growing hope, and lean into the village's subtle shift toward a new view of women like you. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling in your hands, the wool remember that strong, neat thread, piling steadily as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The faint embers glow, a soft echo of the village's slow shift toward tolerating spinsters. sparked by women like Joan and Marjorie weaving their worth into the community's web. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's loom silent now, her mended blanket folded. Nearby, after her push to save the barley strip through marriage, the tanner's boy, madness claims, and guardianship threats weigh heavy. But now, as the evening's hush deepens outside a soft breeze, distant crickets chirping reflecting on your legacy's quiet mark. Your defiance, small but steady, could leave a trace in the village's story, and you're wondering how your choice to resist marriage might echo beyond your lifetime in medieval Europe. Legacy for women was often tied to marriage and heirs, especially by the 14th century, when a peasant's worth, like your family's barley strip, was measured by family lines and land. For a spinster like you, refusing the tanner's boy meant crafting a different legacy, one of quiet rebellion, or contribution through work, not children. A quirky tidbit: some spinsters left legacy weaves, clothed with hidden patterns gifted to younger women as a symbol of defiance. You're picturing your skein, woven tight, as one Joan might pass on. Historians still argue whether these legacies were intentional or just survival's byproduct, but as you spin the wool, your mark feels like a thread in a larger tapestry. You shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother, now at the hearth, poking the embers with a tired hand. She's fought for the family's honor, but your refusals carved a different path, one she might never see. You think back to the well, those sneers about spinsters fading into nods from women like Joan's cousin, and realize your defiance spinning. Will bartering pennies might inspire others? You've traded at the market, your skeins earning grudging respect. And imagine a girl years from now hearing of the lass who said no to the tanner's boy. Your legacy isn't land or heirs, it's a quiet stand, a defiance thread woven into the village's lore. Joke number 1. If legacy's a quilt, you're stitching one with stubborn patches. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door. The air cool with the scent of damp earth and night blooms. The village paths are dark, but you picture Joan's loom humming, Marjorie's ale brewing, their work building a legacy like yours, small, unseen, but lasting. You've dodged the tanner's boy, faced the church's warnings, and spun wool through madness rumors, each act a mark on the village's memory. You think about old Maud, her rushlights, a faint legacy, and wonder if your skeins, your quiet trades, could light a path for another defiant girl. The church's salvation promise, the men's resentment, they can't erase the mark you're leaving. One penny, one thread at a time. The cottage's smoke stings your eyes, and you think about the folklore tales, the weaver of willow's defiance woven into your own. Your legacy, we've hidden in your skein, could be a gift to Joan or Marjorie's kin. A symbol that saying no isn't madness, but courage. You glance at your mother, her hand still on the poker, and wonder if she'd understand your marker life. That didn't bend to the altar. The villages shift, the secret alliances, they're part of this legacy, proving spinsters can be more than curses. You think about the barley strip, the family shame, and know your defiance carries a cost, but also a quiet power. Joke number 2. If legacy's a song, you're humming a tune nobody's heard yet. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside is hushed and owl hoots. A dog yaps and you feel your legacy taking shape. Fragile but real. Your mother pokes the embers, her silence a plea to conform. But you think about the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and know your mark is yours alone. The church, the madness rumors, the guardianship, threat, they can't erase the threads you're weaving. You spin the wool, the skein growing, and brace for the legacy that could ripple through the village's story. Joke number 3. If legacy's a mark, you're carving it with a spindle, not a sword. For now, you keep spinning the hearths. Faint embers, a mirror of your quiet impact, and reflect on the trace you'll leave in a world that tried to bind you. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle twirling steadily, the wool remember that growing skein, piling neatly as you sit on the creaky stool, your wool dress itching against your skin. The faint embers glow, a soft mirror of your legacy's quiet mark, woven through defiance threads and small acts against the tanner's boy and the villager's scorn. The smoky air curls around you, your mother's mended blanket folded nearby, her silence heavy after her push for marriage, to save the barley strip. The madness claims, guardianship threats, and the church's salvation promise linger. But now, as the night's hush settles outside a soft breeze, distant crickets chirping you're finding peace in defiance. Your choice to resist, small but steady, brings a calm that settles over you. And you're wondering how this quiet strength could carry you through the village's stormy paths in medieval Europe. Defiance was rare for women, especially by the 14th century, when conformity like marriage or cloister was a peasant's survival. But those who resisted, like you, found a quiet peace in carving their own path. For a spinster, peace came not from acceptance, but from embracing the choice to stand apart, even against the village's web. A quirky tidbit: some defiant women wore a freedom braid, a single plait hidden under their cap to mark their resolve. You're picturing one in your hair, a secret Joan might notice. Historians still argue whether this peace was empowerment or just resignation. But as you spin the wool, the calm in your heart feels like a victory. However small, you shift, the stool creaking, and glance at your mother, now at the hearth, banking the embers for the night, her eyes avoiding yours. She's fought for the family's honor, but you're defiant, spinning late, trading with Joan. Dodging the tanner's boy has carved a different kind of peace, one she might never understand. You think back to the well, those sneers fading into nods from women like Joan's cousin, and realize your resistance has found a rhythm, a quiet hum that steadies you. Your skein, tight and strong, is a testament to this calm, a legacy weave you might pass to another girl who dares to say no. You think about old Maud, her rushlights glowing, and know her peace, hard won, mirrors yours. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and step to the cottage's open door, the air cool with the scent of damp earth and night blooms. The village, paths are dark, but you imagine Joan's loom humming, Marjorie's ale brewing, their defiance a quiet chorus with yours. You've faced the church's warnings, the men's resentment, the madness rumors, and found peace in holding your ground. One skein, one penny at a time. The freedom braid, the sisterhood knots, the folklore tales, they've all woven this calm, a strength that doesn't roar but whispers. You think about the barley strip, the family shame, and know your peace comes from choosing your path, not theirs. Joke number 1. If peace is a hearth, you're warming your hands on your own fire. The cottage's smoke fades, and you think about the village's slow shift, the grudging respect for Joan's cloth, Marjorie's ale, your defiance, small as it is, adds to that change, a ripple in the village's story. You glance at your mother, her hands still on the poker, and wonder if she'd find peace if she knew your heart. The church, the tanner's boy, the guardianship threats, they can't steal this calm, this quiet resolve that's yours alone. You think about the miller's son, the madness claims, and know your peace is stronger than their chains. Joke. Number 2. If defiance is a song, you're humming a lullaby that soothes only you. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The village outside is hushed and owl hoots. A breeze says and you feel your peace settling, a soft glow against the night. Your mother banks the embers, her silence a plea to conform, but you spin the wool, the skein complete, and embrace. The calm of your defiance, the church, the village, the men's grudges, they've all pushed you, but this peace, woven from your choices, holds you steady. You think about Joan, Marjorie, and know your defiance is a thread in their tapestry. A legacy of quiet strength. Joke number 3. If peace is a weave, you've spun a blanket to warm your soul as the night deepens. Let your breath slow, soft as the breeze rustling the village's thatched roofs. Picture the stars above, twinkling over the quiet paths, their light brushing the barley fields with a gentle glow. You're standing by the cottage door, the spindle resting, its wool a testament to your steady heart. The village hums, softly crickets singing, an owl calling, and you feel the calm of your defiance wrapping around you, warm as a woven shawl. The well's whispers, the church's warnings, they fade into the night, leaving only your quiet strength. A flame that needs no hearth. Your skein, tight and strong, lies beside you, a promise kept to yourself. Let your shoulders ease, your worries drift like embers on the wind. You're here in this moment, your defiance a soft lullaby, carrying you to rest. Close your eyes. Let the village's hush cradle you and sink into dreams, wrapped in the peace of your own choices. Asterisk sweet dreams.